Alright, so this time we're going to get through some methods, functions, and like statement structures. So let's get rid of this. So let's take a look at some statement structures. So here's the for loop. Commonly, it'll look something like this, right? So commonly, it looks something like this. There's three parts to this, right? 1, 2, 3. This first part is known as the initializer or initialization. So you can imagine it like this. So this one is the initialization. This one, you can think of it as the condition. And this is known as the increments. Now, the initialization means it just creates a variable of a numeric type. All right, so like an integer, for instance. It's creating a variable, so you're going to have the variable type and then the variable name, and then you give it a starting value. That's an integer, right? The next part is the condition. So this whole thing right here evaluates the true or false. So this whole thing is a Boolean. Boolean is true or false, and this whole thing right here, this whole second part, has to ultimately resolve to a Boolean. The last thing is the increment. The increment is literally just a statement. So it could be any expression really. You you can literally put anything in there. A method, a function, a statement like this. It's just saying that every time that it iterates, run this. So with that, we can actually exploit this, right? So let's say initialization, it requires a numeric value, right? So it requires a numeric value. So say instead of 0, let's say that we actually want to specify um, an input value. So let's make a new method. Write static. The reason why we write static is because right now we're in the class that has static methods, and it's main. Main is the entry point, and because that is static, the methods that we want to call have to also be static. The next part is the return type. So if a piece of code returns a value, any value, um, it is known to distinguish two. I call them functions. So a function to me is something that a code that returns a value. If it doesn't return a value, it would be you would type void here, because void is nothing. Void. Like say a warranty sticker. When you peel it off, it's void. It's nothing. Right. The warranty no longer exists. But if it does return a value, you would specify the type. So here, we want a numeric value, and for simplicity's sake, we're going to use an integer. So we're going to type an int, right? Then we're going to give it a name. I'm going to call it get user input. All right. Get user input. Now, we're going to type a message here. Right line. Now, if we take a look at right line, if you mouse over right line, you can see that it says void That means that it's a method that doesn't return a value. Um, and the most common overload, or the way to use it, is a string as the input argument. All right, and there's 18 other ways to use it. Let's take a look at those 18 other ways. Whoops, open the wrong thing. So here it says, this is the documentation for console.writeLine. You can see that it's part of the system namespace. And that's why you would, if you got rid of, say, this right here, as you can see, console, you're going to get an error there because it doesn't know where it's from. If you mouse over it, it'll give you an error. The name console does not exist in the current context. So that's why you're using the system. It's part of system. It's part of the system namespace. Now these are the overloads. These are the way you can use them. Use WriteLine. We're most familiar with this one right here, the second one. So if you click on that, it'll give you an example. Well, examples right there. Right. And this is what it looks like. So it's public static void WriteLine with a string and the value as the input. Writes a specified string value followed by the current line terminator to the standard output stream. So we're gonna say enter a message. Let's do it on here. And now we can say string message console readLine. Now readLine is a method, a function, because it actually returns something. And if you mouse over it, you'll see that it says string. I mean, this method right here returns a string, and because it's a string, and this is a string, and they match, I can actually store this value into this variable called message. And I'm just going to simply return the message. My bad. This is not supposed to be. Oh no, wait. We wanted to do that. My bad. My bad. So enter a number. All right. So we're going to say int here. All right. Now, as you can see here, this returns a string, and this is now an int. A string cannot be stored inside of an integer variable. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to parse it. So because this is int, we're going to go to int dot, and as you can see, there's a parse. And if you look at what it says converts the string representation of a number to its 32-bit signed integer equivalent. And as you can see, the return type, the return type is integer, and the input is a string. Console.WriteLine, as if you remember, is a string. So if we type in parse, let's put in the parentheses. So now the input is the input for int.parse comes from console.readLine. Console.readLine is a string. It gets put into this method, this function, and then it spits out an integer, and then it's going to be stored inside of this variable. And we're just going to return this message. Now we can use this method. This function. So instead of 0, let's change that. Enter a number to start with. So instead of the 0 here, we can actually have functions inside of this for loop. So we can say get input And as you can see, I is now assigned to whatever this gives, this returns. So it could be whatever number the user enters. So we could do the same thing for the next case. So this is a condition. So as long as this is true, the loop will keep continuing to run, and it will stop when it reaches when it evaluates the false. So here, let's say we want to make another method that says when. And actually, let's rename this. Rename. Start number. Let's copy and paste this. So as a programmer, you don't want to be typing a lot. So it's actually good practice to copy and paste where you can. Let's call this one stop number. Enter number to end with. Alright, so we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to say stop number. Now you can see that I've been putting these parentheses. So every time you want to call a function or a method, you always distinguish them by using parentheses. So if it's a method, you want to put parentheses. And then finally we have this increment. Let's say let's do a little trick. So because this is an increment, I said that it can run any statement, right? So this effectively could be part of this. So we can actually just comment this out. I mean, remove it out. And we can even put it here. So basically that right here gets behind the scenes. Actually, it's as though it runs at the very end. So now that we're familiar with this, get rid of these comments and see what that looks like. All right. So instead of leaving this blank, let's just say we want to console.writeLine, for instance. And then we can say I. Let's print out I. Now you're probably wondering, console.writeLine doesn't increment anything. Even though this part right here is known as the increment, it just cares it just cares what statement that is. So we can literally put in any statement here, any single statement. And like I said, this right here behaves as though the increment is actually at the very end of this body. So you can imagine this right here is the increment. And then we can have some code in here as well. So console.writeLine. And then we can say hello world. All right. So let's run this program and see what it happens. See, so what happens here is that it starts up here, and it goes and it looks at this for loop, and it's going to look at this first part, and it's going to evaluate it. It's going to actually run that code. So it's going to say, okay, you want to make it a variable, and then you want to assign it to start number, right? And that's actually a function. So it's going to go and actually execute start number. So it's going to run this. So that's why we got the message on the screen. And then we have, okay, you want to make an integer variable, and you want to assign it to whatever the value returned from int.parse is. And int.parse, the input for that is whatever value that console.readLine returns. And because console.readLine means that we get to put in an input here, is waiting for us to put an input. So let's do 15. You press enter, right? So when I press enter, it goes here. It returns this message, this number, right? And it pops it into here. So I put 15 there. So effectively, this code right here would read int I equals 15, right? Effectively. So after that is done, we move to the next part, the next body part of the for loop. It's a conditional, so this whole thing has to evaluate to either true or false, right? So I is now 15, and it's 15 lower than, and it says stop number. Now stop number, um, I was going to say enter a number to end with, and that's why we see that. Let's put in 100. I press enter. It says hello world because of this, but it also prints 16, right? Because it actually goes down after it finished running this. It's going to run this I++, which increments this I. So it was originally 15. It becomes 16 now. And then after it's done, remember what I said, after this part runs, every time this block right here gets finished, right? So now it's going to run this, and because I is 16, it prints out 16. Now you might be wondering why this thing enter a number or to end again with again. That is because this right here gets run every single time it loops. So after it runs this, you can say that it actually runs this again, or at least that it checks to see if that's still true. Now it's 16 less than, and then it's going to run this method. This function. This time we're going to say 16. And if I press enter, the program is going to most likely close because 16 would be equivalent to 16, and hence this will evaluate to false. And because this is false, it will not run this part, and it will actually jump out of this and go down to this, which is the end of the main method, and hence end of the program. So let's press enter, and as you can see, the program closes. So just remember that this right here gets run every single time it iterates, and so does this. The order that it goes is this gets run first, and then this. Well, starting from the beginning, it would be this block, if this is true at least. If this is true, it runs this block, and then it runs this. It runs this again, and then if it's true, it runs this, it runs this. It runs this, if it's true, run this, run this. If this is true, run this, and then run this. If this is false, skip, jump out. So it will actually exit. So it will be like around here somewhere. It will just go to the next code that's after this 4. Now, if we go to count by threes, we can take a look at that real quick. Where is it at? Count by threes. Let's actually use this opportunity to fix this code right here. How come int x equals 0, console write line x plus 3 Okay, I see. Won't work is because console write line can't do multiple semicolons. So the semicolon is for ending a statement. So what you're asking is console.write line can it not do multiple statements? And that is true. That is correct. Um, it can take in multiple parameters. I mean, it has multiple parameters and take in multiple arguments, but it can't do multiple statements like like I'll say a for loop, for instance. Now we have this one, which is so close. So let's take this one, for instance, and fix it up. So let's get rid of this code. Let's get rid of this. All right. So don't forget your semicolons, and the if statement is a lowercase. You can press Control KD to tell the IDE, which is what this Visual Studios is. It's integrated development environment. So this is also supposed to be lowercase. So let's just fix some stuff up. You're missing a curly brace here. All right. So here you made a number variable of type integer. And you're storing the value 0 in it. And you're saying if number is less than 1,000, number plus 3. Now, the computer is going to run through and it's going to say number, and it's just going to add it with 3, and then that'll be the end of it. Like, it's kind of like, what's the point of asking someone to do a math problem if you're just going to walk away and don't care about the answer? This is basically what you've done right here. You told the computer, add these two numbers together, and that's it. Like, you didn't ask for the results. The computer will do this regardless. It's going to take this number and add it with 3, but it's not going to store it anywhere. It's not going to return it. It's not going to make use of it. And if you look here, let's get rid of these unnecessary parentheses. All right. So you can actually hover over it and it'll actually say it. It says only assignment, call, increment, decrement, await, and new object expressions can be used as a statement. So, so the IDE is actually going to yell at you and say, "Hey, yo, this has no purpose, right? It has no purpose." So, what you actually might have wanted to meant was number equals number plus 3. So basically, what you're doing here is saying the variable number, assign it to whatever number originally is currently is, add it with 3. Right? So whatever the number is, plus 3, and then assign it back into number. A shortcut way of actually writing that would be plus equals 3. Right? So it's saying whatever number is already, add 3 to it. What else we got here? So else if number is greater than 1,000, and you put a console.write line there. Whoops. Which is fine. But I think, there we go. So remember, C# is a case-sensitive language. So when you're typing your code, if you don't have the right casing, it's not going to work. Now, a good way to avoid typing the wrong thing is say if this is called IntelliSense. It senses what you're typing and it'll give you suggestions. the most relevant suggestion would be at the top, and the ones with the stars is basically like the most commonly used by programmers in general, right? And you can actually press tab as you can see the one that's highlighted, and you can press tab, and it will actually fill it in for you. You don't have to type it. Or if you see this thing pop up, and if that's not the right one, you can actually use your up and down arrow keys to choose which one you want. And if you get to the one that you want, you can press tab, and it will write the one that you highlighted. Right. Now you had console.write line here, and I'm guessing you wanted to leave a message that number is over 1,000, right? And I guess um, we can do the same thing here. Let's say number is under 1,000. Let's say instead of number, we'll put in what the actual number is. So we're going to do something called string interpolation, which I've explained already before. So what we can do is like this, and then number. And if you click on this, you can see that wherever it's used is highlighted now. So this will actually print out this variable, or whatever value is stored in that variable at the time. So let's do the same thing here. So to do string interpolation, you need that $sign in the very beginning, and then you want to encase whatever you want to print out in terms of code inside of these curly braces. Everything else is considered a normal string. Only things that are inside of curly braces is actually interpreted as code. And that's why it's called string interpolation. If you got rid of the $sign, it would no longer work. This whole thing is now considered a string, but only a string. So you need that $sign to tell the computer, hey, this is a string interpolated code, basically. So here, we see here that we made a number variable, and then we're going to go into the if statement. It says if the number is less than 1,000, add 3 to number, and then we're going to print out that number, stating that it's under 1,000. We're actually going to move this up, because if it gets to like say 999, right, and it add 3 first, it's going to be 1,002, and it's going to say 1,002 is under 1,000, which is incorrect. So let's move this print statement, this right line at the top. So it's going to say whatever number you're on, and it's going to say under 1,000. And it's going to say number, it's going to add 3 to the number. Now, the thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a read line here, so that the program doesn't close immediately. Now, if you look at this code, the flow of this code, it's going to make a variable, check this condition. If it's less than 1,000, it's going to write this, and then it's going to add 3 to number. Or if number is greater than 1,000, it's going to just print this. I can tell you right now, as the code is right now, this part right here will never run, because you're starting off with 0, right? You're going through this if statement, and then it's not going to do this part because it's not true, and then it's going to stop right here, and it's going to wait until someone presses enter, and then the program's going to close. Now what you're missing here is a loop, something that can tell this piece of code right here to run over and over again, right? So a good thing here would, that would fit nicely is this. Now typically having while true is a bad practice, unless you're like making a game or something that requires a infinite loop. And this is what this is called. This is called an infinite loop. this loop will never stop unless when told to, specifically in explicitly in the code, which we're going to do right now. So this code right here, because this is always going to be true, will run forever. But we have this if statement here and this else statement here. So let's say we actually get to this point, and we want to break out of this loop. We can say break. So once it gets to this point, it'll print this message. It'll break out of this loop and then finally go here. Right? So let's run this. Now, if you look at the code, the output, you can see that 0 is under 1,000, 3 is under 1,000, and it'll go all the way up to 999 is under 1,000. And then it says 1,002 is over 1,000. And then it stops. Now, there's a feature called breakpoints and debugging. So I'm going to teach you how to debug right now. Let's say you want to put your step through your code, right? You want to figure out, oh, how does my code behave when I run it? Like the flow of the code. What you can do is you can go over here to any line of code. Well, not any. There are ones that you can't do. So I say right here, this curly brace, you can't add one here. Right? Oh wait, what? So let me add one. Huh, that's weird. Well, typically, that shouldn't be a feature because that actually just means that you want to put a breakpoint here, right? But let's say you want to add one here, right? The very beginning of the program, right? You add one there, and then you click. Make sure that this says debug, right? And you click on start. The program will actually get to the line of code that you selected, and it will actually pause. It will actually pause the program, and then you can step through the program with these buttons right here. So this is called step into. This is step over, and this is step out. So this allows you to control the flow of the break. So right here is where your code currently is. So if we go step over, you can see there's this arrow is showing you where the code is running right now. So it's going to go into the while loop. Now it's going to go into the if statement. It's going to evaluate this part right here, right? Console write line, and then after I click step over now, you'll actually see the message get print onto this console. See? And now it's going to say number plus equals 3. So this is the part where number is actually incremented to by 3. It hasn't happened yet because it hasn't get past that code yet. This is just telling you where you're currently at. Also, while debugging, if you hover over a variable, it'll actually tell you what value it is. So number right now is 0. If I click this and mouse over number again, you can see that it changed to 3. So that will help you a lot while you're designing your programs and stuff and debugging if your program isn't working properly the way it is. Now we're going to go through this, and I'm just going to I'm going to click this several times. Actually, I'm going to change the breakpoint. I'm going to put it here. Oh yeah, you can actually change the breakpoint and remove breakpoints as you debug. So let's say I want to change it here now. You can actually press continue. So the continue button will actually continue the code until it hits another breakpoint. So if you press continue, these buttons right here will no longer be available to you until it hits another breakpoint. That's why I put it here, because I know that it's inside of a loop, and if at the end of the loop, it's going to go back up here, and it's going to hit this breakpoint again. Right? So let's do that. Continue. And as you see, it hit the breakpoint. And I'm going to keep doing that until we get to the very end. Until we get to 999. I should have used a smaller number. Actually, you wrote this code. You should have wrote a smaller number. Well, I guess I should have changed it to a smaller number. So 999. As you can, if I hover over this, now is 1002. Now look what happens to the flow of the program now. If I go over here, right, it's going to evaluate this part first. It will always evaluate from top to bottom. So it's going to evaluate this, and obviously 1002 is not smaller than 1000, and then it's going to jump over to here. Let's see that in action. We're going to step over. It's going to evaluate it. It says, oh, that's not true, so I'm not going to do this. I'm going to check the next part. It says if number is greater than 1000, right? And that is actually true, and that's why it's jumping into this block. And now it's going to print this line. As you can see, 1000 is over, 1002 is over 1000, and then it goes to the break, and you can actually see it. So once it highlights break, it also highlights the while. That means it's going to break out of the while, right? So it broke out of the while, and now it's going to wait for a line to be entered, right? So I can press enter here, and the program shall end. All right. So let's talk more about making methods and functions. All right. Let's say you want to make a calculator that adds two numbers together, right? So for this specific case, it's going to be static, right? And let's say we want to add two whole numbers together, and it'll return a whole number. So a whole number will be an integer, right? And that's called the method. Let's call it add, right? Now we can specify the input parameters. So the parameters are the restriction that you want to give onto your functions or methods. Let's say the first input value, right, is also, we want to add two whole numbers. So the first one is going to be an integer, right, is a whole number, and we're going to call that, give that parameter a name. Let's say number 1, right, and then we're going to put a comma because we want more than just one. We want two numbers, and the second number is also going to be a whole number. So let's do int, and we're going to give it another name. It has to be a different name than from the first number, the first name. The first parameter, because otherwise the computer can't distinguish between the two. So we're going to say num2, right? Now here, we're simply going to just say return num1 plus num2. It's as simple as that, right? Now what we can do is make a method which asks the user to input a number. So if you can remember from earlier, we made a method. So we're going to say, we can call it getNum this time. We're going to say int user number equals, actually this makes it more straightforward so that you can understand it better. So this string equals user input console.readLine, right? Whoops. There we go. So readLine is going to return a string right there. Tell you right there, string. And it's going to store it into this string variable called user input. Next, we can say int equals int, and then we're going to give it user input as number equals int dot parse. And if you look at, if you mouse over it, it's expecting a string as an input. And we're going to just copy this and paste it there, right? So now we've taken this as a string, this text. We interpreted whatever that text that number text should be, and actually transformed it and turned it into an actual number, right? And now we can go ahead and return user input as number, right? We also wanted to tell the user a message. So let's say console.writeLine, enter a number, right? Now we can also add a parameter again. Let's say int again, or let's say string. Let's say count. So get number has a parameter now called count, and I'll show you later why how we're going to use that. We're going to use string interpolation by putting a $sign here. Enter, and we're going to get rid of this a. Enter number, and then we're going to put a curly brace here, and we're going to put the word count here, right? So it's going to write whatever line this text right here is, plus inside of it whatever count so happens to be is going to replace this part with that, right? So let's go ahead and define our first num, right? Equals get num, and as you can see, it's erroring out because it's expecting a string, right? Enter number 1, right? So it's going to get the user to enter the first number. We're going to copy and paste. We're going to say second number, and this is going to be number 2, right? And finally, let's say added, or actually no, let's call it sum, equals, and we called it add. And as you can see, if you mouse over add now, it has 2 parameters, like we specified right here. We have 2 parameters, the first one being an integer, the second one also being an integer. And they're both called num1 and num2. So let's put first num here, and then second num there, right? And finally, let's just print out the result. And you might be wondering, well, sum's an integer, right? And writeLine, I thought that only works with strings. Well, if we go back up, you see there were 18 overloads for writeLine, and if we look, you can actually see that right here, writeLine also accepts an int32, so it would actually print out the number just fine. All right, so let's run this program. Actually, let's debug it. And then let's walk through the program. So as you can see, it broke right there. Let's make it smaller. Let's close this. Let's minimize that. All right. So here we're at the first part. It said, oh, we're gonna make a variable. We're gonna jump, and if you look at it, it's gonna say enter number 1, right? Because it actually ran this program. Oh, actually here, let's run that again. Actually, instead of jumping over, let's jump in. If we jump into, that means it's actually gonna jump into this function right here, and we'll actually see even more in depth the code path. So let's go jump into, and as you can see, it actually goes into that method now. It's gonna write this number, enter number 1, right? Because we put a 1 here, right? Now it's gonna wait for us to enter a number. So let's put 26. Press enter. Now it's going to, as you can see, right now the variable is 0, but it's going to parse this input right here, and it's going to turn it into 26, right? And it's just going to return that value now. Now after that's done, this which is right here, it's actually going to jump back up and go here. See, it's going to jump back up. Now it's going to go to the next line. Now this is the second number. It's going to run that same method again, but this time it's going to count will be 2. So it should say enter number 2 this time. Ready? There you go. Enter number 2. Right, because 2 we put here. It's going to be passed into this, and then that is then passed into this. All right. So now I was waiting for the second number, so let's put 24. Press enter, right? So now it's going to convert that 24 into an actual number, and then we're going to return that number. We're done this method now, or this function now, so we're going to jump back up. We're going to go next. We're going to create a variable called sum. It's going to run this add function that we made. Let's jump into that. So you mouse over num, you can actually, in num1, you can actually see this 26 that's been inputted. And number 2 has been 24 that was inputted. Right? So when you jump through, it's going to say return num1 plus num2. Right? It's going to say, okay, this method is now done. Right? It's still 0 because it only executed this part. But if I click this again, it now assigns sum to 50. Because that was the result of this whole method returning 50. Now I was going to rewrite this to the screen, and there you go, 50. And this last part right here is because the program is just waiting for user input to press enter, which I'm going to do right now, and the program will end. Whoops. Ugh. Oh, I didn't run the, there we go. Huh. Oh, okay. So as you can see, debugging is very helpful. And I think that will be it. So this that was making functions, functions and methods, I guess. So methods basically will be the same thing, but it'll be void, and they don't actually return anything. So this right here would be irrelevant. See, it'll actually give an error. Returns void. Return keyword but not blah blah blah. So void, if you put void here, that means they are functions which do something, but they don't actually return a value, right? So that's that. So I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any other questions, and until the next tutorial, I guess.